I'm here at a second-hand car store just outside of Abiquiu, not USA, and there's a Bradley IFV for sale. Don't mind if I do, because this land has been at war with a machine overlord for the last 10 years, and we need to not only generally fight them off to preserve humanity some more, but to work out why the machines have started taking humans alive instead of killing them recently. Such is the situation in the aftermath of the first mission of Terminator, Dark Fate, Defiance, Destiny, Duel Masters, Deluxe, and so on. In between missions, you often get the chance to go shopping and organize your army, particularly managing the ammunition and fuel available to them. Now, there are various aspects of this I feel I could speak on for a long time, and I think I will, but I've decided to mercifully give only the basics here as a taste. Let's see if I can manage that. In the war-torn lands of not USA, you can purchase a Bradley from a shifty guy in a gas mask by spending so-called goodwill points. You might think this is an abstraction that means you've convinced them to give you it for free because they really like you, or something like that. But nay, it works on people who officially don't like you or you've never met and such, and it is later revealed that goodwill points are the name of a physical currency you can trade in. And no, I'm not going to get mad about that. I am not. I think we might revisit this later. More important and relevant is the fact that in order to drive towards Albuquerque to investigate a machine prisoner capture operation, we need to have 4 days of supplies. I mentioned in part 1 you have this invisible supplies counter in missions that is revealed here on the campaign map. Your supply stat is an extremely abstracted and vague measure of your ability to do stuff, and it can be retconned to mean anything. You can convert supplies into repair parts, fuel, bullets, or food as needed, which does begin to raise certain issues that true Offie D-heads might remember I ranted about in my Star Sector Brainworms breakdown, where it does the same abstraction of all resources into one universal number. All I'll say about it for now is that I didn't have enough supplies to go to the mission, and I had to sell stuff. This gives you goodwill points you can spend on buying supplies, and it reduces the amount of supplies you need to travel across the map. So there is some interesting decision making here where it's encouraging you to proceed into each mission with the minimum amount of units possible. But of course, knowledge of what the minimum possible actually is will be reserved for non-blind playthroughs, so I can't really engage with this system. My general priority was to spend everything all the time, so I reached most missions with basically no supplies left and no points to spend. And while I didn't know that was going to work out, I suspected, and indeed it was the case, that each mission will give you enough supplies to take most of the available units in the game to the next mission at least. And it kind of has to be true that, because there is a risk of soft-locking the game by running out of supplies, meaning the developers have to be quite generous about giving you exactly the amount they think you need to get to the next mission. Your only recourse if you actually do run out of supplies is that you can convert units into supplies, and I think I did this somewhere in the campaign, so we'll look at that more then. There is an emergency way to get out of being soft-locked a little bit. There was one myth actually about supply use and travelling on the map that I convinced myself was true, and totally isn't. Vehicles don't let you travel more efficiently. This was the idea I had. As in, part of your supply cost per day of travel is presumably food for the troops and the hangers-on that travel with you. So I made sure to arrange my army such that it always had enough vehicle seats to mount everybody, mounting all of your units, so that none have to travel on foot. That was my idea. The theory in my poor, naive head was that by accelerating travel, by spending more vehicle fuel, that's ultimately better than needing more human fuel for a longer period of time. But no considerations of this nature are taken into account in the game, as far as I know. I think your force moves at a set speed, no matter what it actually is, and then supply cost is just a per unit upkeep that's baked in. And because vehicles are quite slow in battles, there isn't even that much advantage to mounting your army in general. I mention this now because I laboured under the illusion that mounting the entire army did something for most of the game. It clearly does nothing, and I had completely convinced myself of the opposite, so I just never noticed this. The amount of time it takes to get from one location to another doesn't seem to change based on anything. But I believed so hard that it did, that I just kept acting as if it did. But I was ultimately betrayed. I did suffer for it as well, because Mounting your army in vehicles is a pretty annoying process. The game's not sort of naturally leaning towards you doing this in the UX, but I want to get into UX complaining another time. We slimmed down to be able to drive to Albuquerque, basically. Although it turns out you don't have to get there for the next mission because it takes place at a random location outside of the city. And the game did actually warn you in the beginning that you won't necessarily be traveling to the destination it says you're going to because you don't know what's going to happen or sideline you along the way. The good news is that doesn't happen, broadly speaking. This might be one of the only times it happens in the game. And it also can't happen, again, like I'm using my meta-knowledge here, because since the game can be soft-locked, if you mess up the supply management system, the numbers kind of have to be real just from a player consideration perspective. It can't lie to you too much about how many supplies you need, because you'll just be forcing players to reload a save, pretty much guaranteed otherwise. And they were nice. Broadly speaking, just take the amount of supplies it says you need, and that will be fine. Here, the movement army has this position aimed at preventing Legion moving down a road. And yet a Legion army is heading to defend Albuquerque, coming down this very road right now. And the movement forces have already been pushed back, so we'll support the Albuquerque mission that is sort of happening off screen by preventing the enemy's reinforcements here in this little sideshow. We'll take over the roadblock for the movement, and there will be various side goals and surprises thrown in along the way, which we'll get to. This is a nice early mission in the game that really shows off the bit-of-everything approach to RTS battles this game has. Similar to the end of the tutorial, you'll be facing every kind of target in every kind of situation across a wide area all at once. Well, let's see it. We begin with this assault on a collection of buildings that are in this ideal place to contest the road. The problem being that we have to run across a load of open ground, including the road, to get into range. And there is a soft time limit here as well, in that the convoy you need to stop is on the way, and it will show up whether you've captured this position or not. I went in for an attack on 3 sides, with the good units in the north and west, and the more disposable units in the east, acting as a distraction to keep the Legion facing that direction. Here's a case where mounting units is useful because I can attack from the north and west a bit faster by having the mechanized units go over there first. Now, most buildings in the game are large enough that units garrisoned inside will take a while to reposition if you attack from an unexpected direction, so having a few movement troops milling about in the east means the enemy don't react very much to me attacking from the west with good troops. What I didn't know about yet though was the ability to attack garrisoned buildings directly. By default, if you order an attack on a garrisoned building, it means to shoot at the building, but you can also activate an assault mode that turns your attack order into an order to go inside the building and clear it at close range. I think I learned that later in this mission, so perhaps we'll get to see that. 2 things to note about this little battle here. One is that the convoy did indeed show up before I was ready. In fact, 2 convoys had showed up by the time I started taking the ideal defensive position. We took them out, in the second case without even looking at it, by spamming both tank shells and, more importantly, loads of ATGMs that were sitting back there. There will be many convoys of increasing size as time goes on, and the question in the background of a situation like this is, given that I have only a certain amount of ATGMs, should I be letting them sit at the back firing at will at whatever they want? Because actually mines or infantry weapons can kill a lot of the Legion's vehicles on the cheap. As usual, I'm going to be doing the no micro option, so just fire at whatever, and we'll see if we can afford it later. But speaking of micro, the second point to make is that you can probably tell I had reverted to RTS mode. I'm not pausing all the time anymore like in the previous mission. I played the building assault in real time. I look back fondly on these moments, the naivety, the belief in a brighter future that I had. The fight was very much in my favour, so it's not like I really needed to pause and make a more detailed attack. However, I still would have benefited from doing so. Well, let's see how long this real-time dream lasts. Once we're in position, part of the movement force threatens to defect to you. Then after asking nicely, we get their commander to agree, and this is part of the running theme that the movement are overflowing with troops and vehicles. They make no effort to keep them either alive or within their chain of command. Handy for us, as we suddenly gain a load more units. Which is good and bad. Good because we'll need them in a few seconds, and bad because I'm hardly used to playing and microing the army I already have, and now there's even more stuff. Well, yep, we'll need it because the game now pulls its signature move, which is to say, actually can you do this now? We're asked to both secure the entire road and a new western approach as the convoys are actually coming from a different direction now. There's some kind of industrial position in the west you need to take, trying to cut the enemy from getting to the same road exit in the south, so you can still defend in the south where the movement command post is, and we'll make use of that. It's another guess what you need, second playthrough is easier sort of decision moment for you. Because whenever the game is going to add a new simultaneous objective, you'll always just have to go through your setup and guesstimate how much you need to leave behind to still complete the original objective. In practice, this is quite a meta decision, because what I'm really deciding is, what do I think the game developers will think is an appropriate amount of stuff to send down the original road while I'm moving to contest the new road? I need to imagine that force and leave a detachment that can defeat it. Of course, without such knowledge here, I'm just going to be erring on the side of caution, which is the more immersive way of playing. This whole guess what the developers are thinking approach isn't really what I want. It's what I'm doing in practice because the game is heavily scripted. I'm fighting against the script, not the enemy. I can't make a sort of tactical decision based on my knowledge of the enemy to decide what to do. I have to guess what the script of the game is. And this is touching upon a big point I'll be ranting about much later in this series, I expect, so let's just move on. I do have a practical consideration to help me make the decision in this case, the decision of what to send, because we know the places I need to go are far away, and part of my force is mounted, so we'll send the mechanized units on the attack and the infantry units will be on the defense, garrisoning the buildings. With that as my guide, I'll start moving out. But we're given another objective before we get very far, which is to do a quest for the integrators. Yes, the integrators have a large base in the middle of this map, but they aren't aligned enough to either side to participate in the battle raging around them. They're just there. What they do want is to secure a rare tank weapon system that's being held by a nearby gang operating out of a prison complex in the bottom right. There's no particular time limit given for this mission, so it's more of a casual objective. And I didn't fully appreciate that really, as we'll see. Well, I was still trying to focus as well on securing the road, and that's good because it grants you additional movement reinforcements, including a load of artillery pieces that will help us lock down the first convoy approach, although these reinforcements are AI controlled. Meanwhile, I've put my tanks and Bradleys to cut the road junction I think the other convoy route will need to use to get out of the map, so we can sort of do the western objective at the same time while staying near our main road position. Obviously that means I need another objective, don't I? Like, things are going too well. So here comes the next one. We need to rescue a pilot from the top left of the map. Yes, the movement force has planes, would you believe it, but their only decent pilot got shot down, and we need to rescue him, which unlocks airstrikes later. Hence we now have objectives covering like the entire map. We need to secure the north, the northwest, the southeast, and the west. Luckily, it's not that bad, because the top left of the map is mostly empty for most of the mission, as it turns out, and you can just send a van or something to do the pilot mission and not worry too much about it. Of course, I'll end up sending like an APC full of troops, because I don't know what to expect. Just yet another second playthrough advantage moment. I might as well stop pointing those out, because I think, as I mentioned in the first part, essentially everything is a second playthrough advantage moment, but the true experience of the game is making the decision without that info. I'm kind of conflicted here between min-max gamer brain and a more simulation-focused, immersed brain, because I usually think that what I want is to get the best result, which in this game means saves coming, more so than usual. Like, this is true in any game you can saves come in, but here, because of the positive feedback loops, it really means that. But actually sitting here, looking at your layout and just thinking, what can I spare now? What will do the job? What's safe to send into the fog of war in enemy contested territory? That assessment wouldn't be happening at all if you were playing quote-unquote well, or using the best available methods. And losing that assessment, losing that experience, that is something. You know, it's something in one of the games of all time, indeed. There is a real point to make on this topic of it being my first attempt, which is the fact that all the objectives are happening at once, and it's bamboozling me more than it should. You are given the freedom to not do objectives, or choose when to do them in some cases. But I was taking on all these goals with an ASAP mindset. In some cases that's going to be saving me because they really do have soft time limits in the background, but in other cases that's going to be a problem. It's hamstringing me. The main point is that the prison attack side objective isn't that important, and a lot of my offensive units are parked over there, kind of waiting to do it when I have a moment to look at it. And it's really the worst time to be set up like that, because the objective really right now is to capture the factories in the west of the map to secure the second convoy route. And that is time dependent, not only because more convoys are coming, but because a large movement force is deploying against that position, and obviously the best time to attack is during the battle that's now ramping up over there. Meanwhile, I've also got my APC looking for the pilot, and I'm scrambling to establish a logistics position in the south of the map so I can distribute ammo to my anti-tank vehicle weapons, as they used up everything holding off the first western convoy. And it's all a bit much, and I'm pausing for extended periods to mentally soak in what I'm doing. And this became something of a crutch that I think did dampen my appreciation of the game. I'm sort of hinting here that maybe less to do, but also less time to think about it, might give more of a healthy mix between action and planning. At least for me personally, this is a very subjective assessment. Because indeed, to return to my original point, the situation is somewhat my fault. I don't have to do everything at once. Or do I? I guess I don't know otherwise. I'm guessing that I didn't have to do everything at once. I don't know what the real time limit setup is. It's the sort of game where if you don't attack the prison right away, maybe the integrators leave and you fail the quest or something like that. Like, this is a very plausible outcome as well. So I can just be even more paranoid to counter my original paranoia. I wanted to point out how the real-time dream has died by this point. I'm pausing the game for long periods, then unpausing for like 1 second. I think I was mentally swamped by this idea that I'm doing all these things, that these 4 objectives that need to be completed ASAP. I'm trying to capture the prison buildings, I'm keeping an eye on the units that are getting close to the pilot APC, I'm trying to work out who needs to resupply down in the south, and I'm deploying units to aid in the movement push to the west. The northern front, well, I'm not looking at that, and luckily that's the one that's okay not to look at. And then things snap completely when the integrators also start attacking me. This luckily isn't the developers finally obliterating me. It's because you aren't allowed into their base, and the pilot APC path found right through the middle of it while I wasn't looking. I should have paused even more to avoid that then, huh? Well, we're really screwed here, and ended up loading a save to at least try and avoid the integrators going hostile, so here's another save scum moment. The game auto-saves after each objective or side objective, meaning there will be like 10 checkpoints throughout a mission at least. You can also manually quick save and load at any time if you want, which unlocks the true potential of a save scumming strat where you reload every time you fire an expensive weapon or something. I didn't do that, but I do wonder if that kind of madness is required at the higher difficulties. So now I'm going to replay part of the stage, with the main difference being that I held off on making the prison attack until a bit later, so that I could focus more on the pilot and western attack missions. Focus with my micro, I should add, not actually with my units. I still actually sent all the units over there, they're just not doing anything now, I'm just playing worse to make it easier for myself. I got the supplies out faster, I moved more stuff into the western attack faster, and I also set up for the prison attack a bit better for when it was going to begin. And I think it was around this time I began to notice you could order assaults on buildings, which is pretty much essential for getting through the tight cluster of massive buildings down there. While all that happens, I wanted to raise 2 general points on difficulty. Number 1 is that if you were looking very closely back at the start of part 1, you'll know that we're playing on quote-unquote medium difficulty, which is the de facto normal difficulty. However, there is another difficulty called normal, which confuses things here. The point the developers seem to be making is that there is no easy difficulty, and what is called normal is the lowest possible. It seems they are recognizing that a casual gamer approach to this game won't really work, so a normal level of challenge is only available on the de facto easy mode. As for what the difficulty levels do, it does tell you a little bit, which helps satisfying the conditions of the Offie Grand theory of difficulty, that being that the more it tells you about what the difficulty levels do, the more skilled the developers were, and probably the better the game, because only developers that are confident in their balancing and programming of challenges will let you explicitly know what the difficulty levels do, while the more hacky developers will just make the AI cheat and then say nothing about it because they couldn't implement anything clever and there's nothing to be proud of there. In this game it is kind of like the AI cheats actually. They do more damage, have more units, and you get less ammo on higher difficulties. I've no idea what playing up there is like, and I'm too panicked to try. I'm sure for a second playthrough with all the advantages you get from knowledge of scripted events, you'd get so much exploit potential that dealing with high difficulty likely becomes quite feasible. The second point though on difficulty I wanted to make is something I kind of touched on already, which is how the game escalated and expects you to face all of its challenges very early on. I mean that not only in terms of there being many simultaneous fronts all over the map to handle, but in terms of what units you face. In your standard sort of RTS campaign progression, the enemy roster will gradually be expanded over time as you play deeper into the game, trying to give you both time to get to grips with certain units and also constantly adding new challenges to keep it fresh feeling the whole way through. That's the idea anyway. Terminator Dark Fate's Defiance takes a different approach, in that what you see facing us here in this mission is the endgame enemy roster. They have all their units in the field in every mission, starting from the Haven Base Defense tutorial mission. This is almost true for you as well, in that you get an Abrams early on, which is essentially your best unit. Later on you do get more options, but it's nothing like the usual one new thing per mission paradigm, which I feel like is the standard RTS learning curve. So there would be a mission where you mainly fight, say, just the Terminators, and the objectives are essentially telling you how to fight Terminators, being like, oh, they're weak against this, use this particular tactic. Side objective, use smoke in this exact position to block this exact line of sight. Like, it's really obviously teaching you how to fight one unit in a mission. That's what normally happens. But here, you and the enemy have your whole roster to fight with right from the start, with all of their abilities and such, which is another great for the second playthrough type design. It's a chief reason why the game is so intense from the get-go, because you have to fight the strongest enemies in the game immediately, and virtually no game will ever do that. The Legion tanks are what I'm referring to here really, because those are the only thing Legion has that outclasses what the humans can deploy. I mentioned the Legion army kind of sucks, but this may be difficulty level dependent as well. Well, we'll rant about that another time. You also do face heavy artillery in this mission later, and all of the Spiders, APCs, and Terminator infantry you could ever want to see. The only thing you don't face actually is the ATGM Spider, the Legion's secret best unit, which is extremely rare. Well, that said, so much of the fighting happened while I wasn't looking at it that I can't even say that for sure. The point being, if you were playing this mission and thinking it was kind of hard, it's because the game just ramps up to a difficulty ceiling right at the very start of the campaign and then stays there for the whole game. It's not really going to get much harder than this. Like in the final mission, you'll be facing the same enemies, same allies, same size of map, same sort of thing. It's just different missions, different battles. And while I suppose from a purist game design perspective, it means less consistent fun, less novelty, less growth available for the player even, I will accept that weakness, but what it does tend to do is give it more of a war simulator feel, where you're given a certain experience, the word I keep referring to, the experience, that makes sense in a context. Like, you know, the context of a war. The enemy don't send one new unit type per mission, do they? If you're a new officer on the scene, you have to do everything immediately, same as if it's your 100th battle. The whole game is just a trial by fire in that regard, which I think from a purely objective standpoint is something that's bad about it on balance. And I'm almost certain I would have liked it more, and perhaps most people would have liked it more, if it did ramp up in a more traditional style. It doesn't have to go the full way, but just a bit more at least. However, the fact that it doesn't does lend it a unique and positive quality that might make it worth playing in a world where there are already plenty of generic RTS campaigns, right? You know, this might be cope. It's a bit like saying, in a world full of fun and fulfilling strategy games, our USP is that our game isn't fun and fulfilling. How about that? Do you want to give me some money and then spend 10 hours on the pause screen just to get good enough to get past the second mission? I don't know, I think I like that it's no nonsense and full on from the beginning. It's faithful to its world in that regard, which is kind of a courageous game design decision, you could say. And I enjoyed that, at least in retrospect. I'm going to present this praise here with the caveat that it's probably cope, Souls Home Syndrome style post hoc justification for like feeling proud of doing something challenging that wasn't actually fun to do. And hence, were I to go back in time and meet myself in the past, I probably wouldn't recommend playing this game. But I suppose I don't want that to take away from the fact this game is unique and has some really special good things about it that are just in this game. I suppose the big, meta design question is, are the things that are unique and special about this game completely integrated with the things that are also bad about it, so they couldn't be separated? Or can the game be improved? Can this same general experience that I'm saying is good be provided, while also providing consistent fun and learning experiences and preventing overwhelmingness and maybe even allowing you to play it a bit more real time as well, and all the other small details. You know, maybe change the name of the factions. I mean, that's already like 5 points on the out of 10 scale improved, isn't it? It's the greatest game of all time. Never play it. There's another mid-video review. Now back to the actual game. We secured the prison eventually, and we secured the Western Convoy route eventually. For the prison quest, you had the option of either acquiring some item, referred to only by an acronym, or selling whatever it was to the integrators for some cold, hard goodwill points. Since I had no idea what it even was, I just took the money and left it at that. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything good there. We have taken significant casualties to enemy artillery positioned in the northwest now. On the way to stop that, we also need to take out an AA position. I'm taking the armoured units on a quest to go and deal with everything over there, and thus we soon unlock airstrikes. Only certain units can call them in, and they're extremely unuseful, I'd say. Actually way more useful if you're attacking, but we've pretty much done the conquering of the map now. One thing this inspired me to add about difficulty is that the game is increasing difficulty by making you take more damage and have fewer resources, the classic difficulty level thing. But one more mechanical option they had here was to simplify secondary objectives, or remove them even. For example, let you use the airstrikes without first taking out the AA positions in this mission, stuff like that. Because I would argue that the game's difficulty is primarily arising from how much stuff you have to do. So having the easy mode just be that there's less stuff will let you adjust the difficulty without doing any of the bullshit smelling, you take more damage style difficulty changes. And it's always nice when difficulty changes actually change the game itself rather than present a de facto slower version of the same game content. And this also rewards you for playing at high difficulties, doesn't it? Because you get a bit more game. The puzzle you're facing is materially different, in theory, at high difficulties, if there are more objectives to face. Hey, for all I know, that is how it works, because I never checked. We did kill the artillery, as you might have noticed. That artillery had been killing a lot of my units, and strangely, it had been shooting at units it shouldn't have been able to see, so I think potentially some cheats were at play to give it line of sight on your positions when the enemy weren't there. Then again, realistically, in a battle like this, in a war like this, both sides would have full line of sight all the time, most likely, because of how easy it would have been to fly drones and such would have been in the future, especially keeping in mind that in this timeline, in the Dark Fate timeline, this war's happening post-AGI being around for a while, so humanity was more advanced than we are at the same time in the 2020s. There were probably drones and cameras coming out the wazoo. Well, we've got ATGMs coming out the wazoo, so something simpler should be easy to find, I guess. Just let everybody have full line of sight, that's what I'm saying. Anyway, I forgive you, AI, if you were cheating. With everything secure, we enter the calm part of this mission, because the convoys we need to stop are on this invisible timer, I suppose. So if you do everything, you end up waiting for them to show up still, and this would be a perfect time to go and do the prison mission perhaps. However, it is also nice to have all of your stuff available for the defense, because you don't really know what's going to come for you, at least the first time around. You might note in the west I'm defending the wrong street, like 1 block away from the real entry point for the convoy. That's mainly because my anti-tank positions are around the first corner on the convoy route, and I didn't want to move them. I wanted to stay close to my supplies and the movement forces, so I kept the rest of the army and the infantry back to avoid aggroing the tanks and just letting them drive through the map for a while, and this still counts as holding the relevant position for the objective just fine. A big wave came in from the north, so I tried to use an airstrike to help out. The obvious problem is that you're calling in bombs on a set location, and then there's this massive lead time before the impact, which makes this a very experience and skill-based judgment call. And what do you know, I think this is the only time in the game you need to call airstrikes on something that isn't stationary, and it's one of the very few times you can call airstrikes at all, in fact. So I'm just going to take my miss here, and even if I sat there save scumming to get the hit, it would probably take a while to work it out. Well, it actually matters, I guess, or nearly matters that I did miss, because one of the tanks in this convoy was really threatening to get past my defences, and I don't really have anything past the first layer of defences. I got lucky in that something disabled its mobility for a while, so it sat still. I used that time to try and EMP it and capture it using Kondo. You can do that Kondo trick from the previous mission at any time, only it requires you to be at point blank range with the enemy, which just doesn't happen or is impossible to achieve. But here's a chance, since this tank is stuck, and I think its weapons were jammed as well. However, Enemy vehicles can also repair themselves sometimes, just like you can, which is fair enough, I suppose, so it was able to get its systems back and I didn't EMP it. While all that's happening, I wanted to also mention something on the topic of vehicle damage, which is that in the majority of cases, apparent vehicle losses are not permanent, at least on so-called medium difficulty. You might have seen just now I took a plasma cannon hit on a technical, and all it did was cause a bit of damage and set the vehicle on fire. As far as I know, fires in vehicles do not cause damage, strangely. Essentially, the vehicle will become unusable and uncrewable. However, after a while, the fire will go out and the UI for crewing it will come back again, and I think it isn't any more damaged after that than it was after the initial hit, so the fire doesn't do anything, it's just a time you can't use the vehicle for. Therefore, while I took a hefty blow, all I lost in practice, or in the long run, was the repair parts to restore its health later. Thinking back, this is a more common result than losing a vehicle outright when you take vehicle hits. And it does seem a little bit unfair because the Legion vehicles tend to die in one hit to a big thing and two to small things, with the exception of the tanks, which are really strong. And Legion vehicles also don't have this intermediate stage where they can get too damaged to use, so they stop taking part in the battle and don't get targeted anymore, but then later they can be recrewed and used again and even restored to full health. They can't do anything like that, which adds to their problem of really struggling to wipe humanity out. We're so pesky like this, getting back in vehicles that were on fire and things like that. I feel like because what we got hit by there, the tank plasma cannon, is one of the Legion's biggest damaging attacks. It's their biggest damaging main direct fire attack. I think a technical, which is a civilian pickup truck with a gun welded to the bed effectively, shouldn't be able to survive it. And potentially that's the difficulty level being kind to me here. In that case, I would have accepted a total loss of the vehicle and the crew, given the amount of explosives and the fuel the vehicle was carrying. The good news is we won the battle. Albuquerque was captured off screen thanks to our intervention, and we are invited to leave the map and go join up with the main movement force at our leisure. The movement detachment in this area happily begins to abandon their artillery and retreat on foot, giving you the chance to outright steal it. I think someone on the radio says it's yours if you want it, and there might even be a reason to abandon this stuff for them because it can only be towed by big rig tractors or military logistics vehicles, which we all lack really. I've got a couple here and there, and I believe I abandoned a personnel carrying trailer to take a heavy artillery piece instead, and that was absolutely the right choice, as we'll see. There's also loads of light artillery around the place, which technicals can tow. The movement also abandoned that, because I guess it just turns out you can scavenge light artillery from pretty much any backyard around here. USA! USA! The actual point to make about this part of the mission is that according to the timer at the very end, this mission lasted 52 minutes. Now I have 6 minutes of footage of me searching the map for vehicles at the end, however there's a massive cut to when I was leaving suddenly, so I didn't even film all of it, and the total footage of this mission is 1 hour and 45 minutes. I mention these times to give some idea of how the non-real-time nature really extends the missions, and how to some extent it was my fault, wasn't it, because I was given the option not to pause and not search the map at the end. So can I really complain? Yes. I think, well, I'm not sure if this is even a complaint really, more of a point of information. Everything takes on average twice as long as you'd think, or at least it did for me, and I do believe that reducing the advantages to be gained by pausing and the need to carefully pick up all the stuff at the end might condense the content of the game into 75% of the time, and be all the more intense and engaging for it. This game is really long, so there's certainly no need to pad for time design-wise. Well, we come away eventually with 1 vehicle lost and 11 troops lost, which really is not helpful information at all. This post-battle screen ultra needs to include what you lost specifically. This is easily the biggest UI fault in an otherwise very goodly UI'd game, especially on the troop side, because losses of men within units doesn't matter much at all. You only need to know what full units you've lost. In my memory, we did lose a full unit of RPG guys in this mission. They got hit by artillery while out on the road and were wiped out instantly. So that would be 4 of the 11 troops lost mentioned. The rest, well, they'll probably be back, like right now, because as we travel onto Albuquerque and get shopping, we can restore all of our units and fuel and supplies and such. Spare manpower can be used to restore any position in any unit. and the amount of spare manpower you're given for free by story events dramatically exceeded the losses taken throughout the game in my experience. #humblebrag and such. The point being that were you to buy a new unit at the unit store, it's going to cost you between hundreds to thousands of goodwill points, whereas buying 80% of a unit through your reserves pool is effectively free. Therefore, all that matters in combat is whether one guy in a unit survives to retrain the rest of the unit for free. Actually, perhaps more important than that is whether the unit kept a hold of any droppable weapon systems it had, because, like, a rocket launcher costs as much as a whole unit that can carry a rocket launcher. It's that sort of balancing. We'll talk more about equipment later on, I think. I refit my army, and I made sure to sell vehicles I thought looked slow, and to have enough passenger space to fit all of my new movement troops, because I was still believing that campaign map traversal speed was some big deal, and was not something that has absolutely no impact on anything at all. But of course, if I could detect things that had absolutely no impact on anything at all, I wouldn't be making these commentaries, would I? So that checks out. And also, I tended to carry around a lot of fuel. I prioritized getting fuel tankers and keeping them in my force, because I thought we'd need that as well. But I'm going to have to rant later about the way fuel works in the game, because I got screwed over big time. And it was a screw over I think probably wasn't my fault, or just based on my own invented mechanics and misgivings, quite so much as the whole we should have everybody mounted thing. Well, whatever my army is now, we're going to move on with it and see what happens. The movement pay us for our services, and you can either take supplies or a deposit of freshly printed goodwill points. I took the supplies, giving me enough to go to the next mission. Didn't have that before, so for better or worse, the game won't end here. Our new goal is to investigate the cartel. Yes, another The Noun faction has arisen. It's a gang which rules most of South North America and probably some other stuff. Supposedly, some of the prisoners Legion has been collecting are being sold to them by this cartel. Therefore, we'll head down to stop them from doing this and get more info on the whole prisoner collection thing. That's why we wanted to go to Albuquerque in the first place, but we didn't really find anything. That's all the plot we have for now. If you haven't seen Terminator, by the way, the reason Legion or Skynet in those films collects prisoners is to make Terminators. At this point in the timeline, Terminators are these weird skeleton things, but later they're more like cyborgs made from humans, and that's what the films are about. I'm going to spoil this now if you didn't know that, because what this prisoner trade is the central mystery of the game, but it's not a mystery to someone who knows enough about Terminator to want to play a Terminator game, I guess. Well, off we go to New Tortuga then, and this is where the game takes a wild turn. And from skimming people talking about this game here and there, this mission is the one people seem to absolutely hate, possibly to the point of ruining the entire game, since persistence means that one bad mission really can ruin the game mechanically, even if players just getting frustrated or bored isn't taken into account. So, let's investigate. This mission begins with the longest and most detailed RPG section of the game. We're navigating the public area of this cartel stronghold, where they run an assortment of businesses. Mercenaries are hanging out, and you can probably buy slaves and such. They even have tamed Legion units for use in gladiatorial combat. Looking around, you'll notice the cartel have substantial forces, including light tanks, Humvees, upgraded with extra armor and weapons compared to yours, and they even have a weapon type the founders somehow lost along the way: mortars. The cartel are a serious army, but more interesting than any of that is that the cartel are the main enemy for the middle half of the game, and I'll give some more thoughts on that aspect later. I originally wanted to go through this whole quest in detail, then I thought, why don't I be merciful today? There are assorted dramas and opportunities in town you can get involved in, and from what I can tell, the specific order you do them matters, specific dialogue choices you pick matter, some things are mutually exclusive, and your main way of interacting with this quest is spending money and fighting. When I say all this matters, by the way, I mean that what you do in this part of the quest determines what units you'll be given at the end when you try to overthrow the cartel. And I must say the game does a bad job of telling you that's what all this is about. It implies you are collecting weapons for a lot of the quests, and I presumed it meant weapons for you to equip on your 2 squads you're controlling, but it totally isn't. It's more of an abstract stock of weapons that will allow you to convert local people into specialized units for your uprising an hour or so deep into the mission. You might have seen I'm out here in the arena fighting robots, and this is the main way to get money. It's somewhat luck-based, unfortunately, and I totally remember save scumming this part because I really wanted to get the best outcome from this RPG section. Essentially, you're given a starting pool of 500 pesos when you start the mission. Yes, these losers have an actual currency and an actual economy, they control their own state. We're the barbarians to the cartel civilization, really. Anyway, to totally win the overall quest and get enough money to do everything, you need to hit the battle arena and take the highest stake gambles available. It's somewhat skill-based, I guess, because you're gambling on how fast you can kill Legion spiders. The RNG aspect is that the length of the battle depends on how quickly the spiders walk towards you and whether your anti-tank guy in the squad has line of sight and hits their shot. And if you take casualties, well, you can actually go and buy more squad members from the cartel's stock of slaves. That defeats the money-gathering purposes somewhat, and I'm certain I save-scummed away my battle arena experiences if I ever took more than one casualty. Usually it was 0, because you see the spider, instantly kill it, and that's that. If you can get 5,000 pesos, you can divert the story in a decent way later on, and you can also use the arena fighting to interest the strongest mercenary group, the Furies, into fighting you, so that you can steal their laser weapons. There are several battles with mercenary groups available in this quest, but they're only cutscenes. You lose control of your main squad, and they auto-battle the enemy squad just in the corner of the map somewhere, leaving you to accept whatever the result is. In this example here, you can get the enemy drunk first to make them weaker, and that works out. However, if you get them too drunk, they actually leave town and you can't fight them, thus losing the chance to get their weaponry for your invisible pool. And that's like actual RPG content. Half the time, something vaguely consequential like that wouldn't even happen in an actual RPG. There's even a little factor I discovered through save scumming antics, which is that if you don't buy certain items in the weapon shop the first time you go there, you can't buy them later, because it's like, well, someone else bought it while you were gone. What game even dares to do that? I'm annoyed and impressed. So it's all surprisingly good, but I guess the reason it might not fit in here, and why people may not enjoy this mission, is that this is a game that strikes fear of failure and fear of missing out at every turn. So having there be unexpected or luck-based twists and invocations of failure and missing out, it's not very satisfying, even though, as I previously argued, the them's the breaks approach to player experience is probably the point, and probably the most unique thing about the game. We're still grinding against the fact that players don't necessarily want a negative but character-building experience, because to go meta again, that's what real life is for most people, and this game happens in real life for the players, so you need to be really put together really as a player to actively want to experience a sense of being out of control and being screwed over and being hopeless and thinking that's a good thing and being like, cool, I'm fearful for the future. This isn't like a movie or something where it's going to resolve any of that later either. It's a program where if you fail, the program ends in failure, and you personally bear that responsibility. You used up your fun having time on something that wasn't fun, and it was either your fault or it was sheer random chance. And you can imagine coming away from that not thinking it was the best. And that's why the game is good, as I keep insisting. To be clear, I also felt all of these things. I personally didn't like doing this, which is why I save-scummed the life out of this quest just to get the best outcome, because that really was the only enjoyable route I could imagine. I'm not the hypothetical player that would enjoy and appreciate missing out on something, and I guess most people also aren't, but I'm holding out the game design alm that yes, there is some purpose for having it be like this, I suppose. I don't have to like it, you don't have to like it, indeed the statistical you doesn't like it, and I think the defense of the game has to take into account that the stuff that's cool and unique about it isn't inherently good game design, if we define good game design as tending to promote positive reactions among the widest possible selection of players. And we don't have to define it like that, do we? Yes, what's the point of calling games good or bad when good or bad can always be nebulously subjective terms? All this cartel junk is good because it's detailed and shows passion for the game and the consequences matter. But it's bad because it's boring and frustrating and outcomes don't match your expectations. And that's good because it's an accurate simulation and teaches you to become a better commander and better player. And that's bad because that wasn't in the brochure, man, and most people are tired of being tested and toyed with by the whims of fate. And that's good because most video games hold your hand and pander to your wants, whereas this one is special for dumping on you and still offering you a way out with sheer ingenuity and skill. And that's bad, because from the achievement data, we can see that most players didn't do that, and if it had been a fun experience to do so, they would have, so it's either too boring or too hard, which is good because it creates a unique sense of achievement in those that did make it, and it makes the game special to them, and it's not like it needs to be special for everyone, is it? Or is it? Everyone paid the same entry price, didn't they? Everyone was marketed the game the same, they were promised the same experience, weren't they? Is there any solution to this endless question of what a good game even is that doesn't involve killing all but a single player, thus eliminating subjectivity by virtue of there being only one operant view, and hence all other views falling away from conceptuality, and should that single player be me, Offie D, back at it again with another video? Terminator Dark Fate, Revengeance and such, out now on PC. It's a solid 5 out of 10, but more like a 7 or 8 if you bring a walkthrough and or a fetish for being punished. And if you're watching Offie D, I know you do have a fetish for being punished. So yes, I do recommend this game. That's my conclusion for today. Let's see if I'm still peddling this cornucopia of copious cope tomorrow. We did some fetch quests, we shot up a brothel, we packed a load of weapons into a van ready for a rebellion, and then we sat down to play some TFFD on PC in 1080p, it's your boy Offie D, and this is where having more than 5,000 pesos makes a big difference. At some point in the stuff I cut out, we joined the cartel, and they want you to do a prisoner exchange with the integrators, or a prisoner sale, where you swap a guy for a remote control Legion tank. The prisoner, though, is a founder's deserter who Mason apparently worked with before, during some incident when this hacker accidentally activated a load of captured Legion units and caused a kerfuffle sometime in the past. What you can do then is repeat that kerfuffle here. First, you simply buy the tank from the integrators and then don't give it to the cartel, so we've got that in our back pocket for later. Then we head to the town square where the cartel keep a small army of Legion units as a sort of trophy collection. Our hacker, Finch, can do his thing and turn them all back on, after which we jump in our van and book it for the west side of town. As members of the cartel, we're now allowed over there into the cartel's HQ areas. The plan is to hand out weapons to all the slaves and oppressed townspeople. The important thing is how optional all of this stuff is, I think. From the achievements, I believe there's a way through this mission that involves heading out of town to an integrator camp and allying with them or getting them to attack the cartel or something, and you can also stick with the cartel and do more of the mission without triggering combat or raising the alarm. It's really good that these choices have real consequences, those being that I've started combat in town earlier than necessary here, in exchange for the Legion units taking out some unknown amount of the cartel garrison on the east side. We use our weapons to spawn a load of units here in the west, and we're told to go capture a helipad on top of the hill to prevent the cartel leader escaping. This is where not triggering combat might pay off if you took that route, because I bet you can just go there if there isn't a battle going on. I don't know, of course, it just seems like the consequences of your decisions are more weighty than even in actual choice-based games, and the weight is felt because the differences aren't just plot, they are mechanical and content-related. It's all really good, although that's maybe only true if it goes well for you in the end, for the aforementioned reasons. Let's not rant. Due to pathfinding antics, we can't move south from here right away, we have to go north instead, which is alright actually because capturing the warehouses to your north gives you more units. We'll be facing mostly cartel infantry and light vehicles, which are better than our militia units, but we can outnumber them locally, and use buildings to make sure these fights go our way. Speaking of our way, there's a cartel tank in our way. That could be a problem, but we get pretty lucky here in that the first RPG fired sets the tank on fire, making the crew jump out. If it was manned as we advanced, its heavy machine gun pointing right at our clumped up guys in a choke point might have been an issue. But we can just run past it here and shoot up the exposed crew. All very good. Although we do now get into this difficult literal uphill battle in which we follow a winding road with loads of buildings and difficult corners where you can get taken by surprise. I've got numbers on my side, and I was able to garrison loads of the buildings, working my way up the chain and occasionally rushing in to assault enemy occupied buildings. It all happened very quickly really, but of course I've got the game paused for most of the footage of this battle, trying to keep people off the road and adjust the plan every 2 seconds when we spot extra enemies and such. With a bit of help from smoke and a missile launching van, we do rush our way to the top. Here we send a movement spy to capture the cartel's helicopter, while our troops get into a firefight over the fancy house up here. The idea is the spy will go and get reinforcements from a supposedly nearby movement force, while we lead the uprising in the meantime. And yes, while our hill is secure, there is still loads of fighting going on that I'm just ignoring. I left a rearguard back in our original position that's been gradually killed over time by an increasing amount of cartel stuff bunching up back there. We lasted quite a long time because of the magic of buildings, and because we're about to have a full-scale urban battle across the entire city as it turns out, I might as well tell you how buildings work mechanically. The game's tooltips describe buildings as imparting a chance for incoming fire to miss. Whether that means it's like cover or an armor save, or it actually magically reduces the accuracy of the shooter, I don't know, but the fact it applies to everyone everywhere in the building, regardless of what the actual cover situation is, implies it's not actually tracking bullet trajectory and saying was part of the building between the shooter and the target, therefore it doesn't count, that sort of thing. It's doing something a bit magical, and there are some subtleties to consider. Firstly, buildings come in various flavors that change the bonus they give. It's something very vaguely, like strong buildings give a 75% chance for stuff to miss, whatever that means. Might even be like 90% as I recall. And then it goes down on a scale to very weak buildings like sheds, which give a 10% bonus or something, with the added fun that a building's rating can be reduced by the damage it takes by units firing at it. So it's kind of like buildings have a health pool that absorbs damage on behalf of the units inside. You could think of it like that. But then we have the issue of surface penetration, and how this interfaces with the chance to miss bonus thing. I can't even begin to know, which is why I'm ranting about this here basically. I'm mad about not knowing something once again. Some weapons have penetration properties, meaning they can theoretically shoot targets inside buildings through cover. Or at least that is what the game implies, implying it through the fact that if you upgrade to plasma weapons on a unit, it comes with the warning that its shots don't penetrate cover, so presumably regular shots can? Then of course you have big weapons like autocannons, RPGs, tanks, that pretty reliably shoot into buildings. However, buildings also provide a bonus against explosive damage types. And if I remember rightly, and I'm sure that I don't, the top level bonus is a 100% reduction, or something very high. That's probably a bit more true. Essentially, buildings are extremely strong, a little bit magically. I think that's the overall message here. And then when you consider that it's actually all RNG based, and that in theory, like within theory in capital letters, having a 50% chance to block all damage can make a unit immortal for an in theory trending towards infinite amount of time. God's video game balancing, what a drug. The lesson is that shooting at units in buildings isn't very effective. And what you can do about that, I'm not quite sure, because I'm not quite sure why buildings block damage, or specifically how it's happening mechanically. So you might have to shoot at a building 10 times more than normal to get the amount of damage you would expect shooting at something in the open. But you can negate that by entering a building using smoke cover to get close easier, or using non-explosive but theoretically cover-penetrating weapon systems, like machine guns or a vehicle weapon maybe, which might bypass the buff from the buildings. Yet I, like a true master of strategy, don't actually know if it does, and I never worked it out via observation either. It seems like a Bradley's autocannon kills things in buildings at a similar rate, so maybe that happens. But that's just like random anecdotal memories from a long time ago now. As you might have noticed, we were offered a few units from our army to come and help out. Why not the rest of them, you might ask? Well, this is something the game likes to do, where it drip feeds you units to keep the tension up, and we'll see plenty more of this pattern, so we'll look into it another time. The battle to secure the military facilities on the edge of town was quite rough, with many casualties, but once done, there are supply trucks here to steal as we prepare to move on. However, the cartel are pushing back heavily down the main road, with several armoured vehicles. The main gun on a cartel tank is essentially a recoilless rifle type affair. It's not that powerful, but it is able to take out the Bradley I had up front. Fortunately, it's only on fire, so we'll get it back later, that old chestnut. But yes, my otherwise mostly infantry force then got into difficulty facing this attack. I tried to save myself using the Legion tank, but it's already really beaten up because that Legion tank comes under your control in the middle of cartel territory and got stormed by all sorts of things off screen. So basically by the time I've got it like in my frontline position, it was on red chassis health. You can't see the health on a unit, but it was nearly dead basically. And then it dies in one hit after charging in and not really achieving very much. It was a nice YOLO charge. I think we took out a Humvee with it or something. That was nice. And you can see there's now smoke absolutely everywhere because of all these fires and smoke bombs going off, which also means that ATGMs can't fire. I'll talk more about that later, but yes, smoke ruins guided attacks, so we can't take out these vehicles the usual easy standoff way. We resolved the situation off screen because I was distracted by this event over in the west, where you can get a load more locals to rise up, if you ask nicely. Back at the main road, I think my second Bradley came and saved the day with the last of its ATGMs, securing our position with only some vehicles on fire and only some weapons out of ammo, and only some units nearly dead. And you know what? I was thinking, I need to send these guys back to a safe place to resupply, and that's the kind of thing I really like about this game, no matter how annoying it might be, as ranted about in the first part also. The immersion levels in carrying out an assault like the one we're seeing here, across a wide front with different unit types, and establishing rear positions that mechanically do something. It's really cool, I think. My only complaint, I suppose, is again this matter of complexity, in that it's so difficult to input what's happening here that I've got the game paused just too damn much. It looks really annoying. Like, I'm going back through the footage, just trying to find what happens, and half the frames are the game being paused. Nothing's happening in most of this gameplay. We can dream of a way to automate more of the game's stuff, such that I would be establishing like where the lines should be placed in principle and units will be garrisoning relevant locations themselves, or say, here's the supply area and just let units go back there. I'm reminded of Distant Worlds 2, a space strategy game I'll soon play again on this channel, where your units could do what they wanted, but you had messages going by on the right telling you what they were going to do next, allowing you to intervene in their logic if you wanted. So like my Bradley there could have automatically gone back to the nearest supply truck to get more Tau missiles for its launcher, and something would have popped up on the side saying, we're going to do this in 5 seconds unless you tell us not to, and there'd be an X button to cancel it and make them hold their position. Ideally, you'd then be able to set up what kinds of rules and when you want the AI to take over. And you know what? I think I'm just reinventing the chain of command here, aren't I? And I think that's what this game needs. It's a dangerous road to go down, letting the AI control player assets. But with so much to do, and with me so wishing this was a real-time experience, I think having platoon leaders or second lieutenants you could tell to organize something for you might make things not only more in-depth and immersive, but more intense and strategy-ish and rewarding and real, things I think the spirit of the game was trying to get to already. Of course, this is one of those things where it's like, okay, but that's basically impossible to program. But you know what? All of video games is basically impossible to program. It's just novel, so like it would be hard, but you'd probably work it out. You, the viewer, who I am holding responsible for developing this game right now. And yes, once again, OffiD is demanding that someone else play the game for him, you might note. But until then, we'll just use my ability to stop time and travel back in time to make up for my insufficiently wide attention window to get the amount of enjoyment out of the game I think was secretly in there. I'm swirling again with this Souls Home Syndrome style comment where I'm looking back at the game thinking this looks cool, like I kind of remember liking this game, but I'm so sure I didn't like it when I was playing. I was so sure I was mad about having to play this game, quote unquote having to play it, that, I don't know, just raising this question for me of like, when is difficulty fun? In what specific circumstances? And for me it's like, well, it's not fun if you played it in the evening, but it is fun if you played it in the morning, like that sort of situation. It's really situational. And I think potentially a lot of the wide debate about what exactly is fun about difficulty might be related to the specific circumstances under which you played the game, including what else happened to you that day outside of the game, stuff like that. The grinding advance continues, and yes, I am going to notice and address a certain elephant in the room that players of the game might have noticed in this footage, but not yet. We face challenges against enemies in buildings stopping my armor in/out of its tracks, with another Bradley fire compelling me to stop and protect it until it's back online. while my infantry were being pounded by mortars, the cartel's secret weapon that somehow no one else remembered was a thing in this war. It functions like light artillery and it can one-shot a unit in the open if you're unlucky. I was dancing around the edge of its range while a suicide squad of RPG troops made an attack down the east side, where you can sort of get a line of fire on the mortars if you ignore a fence, and it seems the shooting did ignore that fence. I believe we took out one of them and disabled the other for the loss of a couple of squad members, so that's pretty nifty. And it's a kind of example of the low-level, high-intensity gameplay that I'm brushing over and cutting out a lot in this video, because for all of the stress of making this attack, it really makes you think, it immerses you, and that's good. We'll touch on that again in a second. Here I'm trying to get an ATGM team to have line of sight around the edge of a smokescreen on some armor protecting the prison to the south, which you have to get to rescue the prisoners before the cartel execute them. One of these many side objectives that gets thrown in the middle of the fight and is just overwhelming, but you can deal with it if you just try not to be overwhelmed by it, where suddenly you have to change the direction and priorities of your attack. If you can save the prison in time, I believe you get a free unit after the battle and tons of bonus manpower as well. A lot of the prisoners are actually Founders personnel, it explains somewhere, despite the Founders not even knowing the cartel exists because of reasons. Anyway, I was saying that all this stuff I'm talking about as being so stressful, it's also very fun and uniquely involving. And if it works, it's more rewarding than stressful. This is the Game Master's job, to make sure I win without me knowing they let me win, that sort of annoying design setup. This game actually isn't doing that at all as well, so this is misleading me talking about this. What this game does is it just lets things get too hard if it wants to, and I think that's why it's special, that's why it's good. While I'm playing, it's not like I was thinking about any of this, by the way. There's no room in my head for game design questions, only for questions of how to take out a tank behind a smokescreen at long range, and I pretty much can't, and this is where you have to just suck it up and deal with that difficult setup and have the secret real fun of the game by finding a way around it. And by you in that sentence, I mean you and not me, because here's footage of me absolutely not doing that. I made a suicidal armor charge to the front of their tanks because I couldn't deal with the smokescreen. I lost a Bradley immediately, and then I rage quit. I was not prepared to accept a Bradley loss basically because they're too useful. I didn't want to play the rest of the game without them. I played the latter part of the battle again with vague foreknowledge of the enemy's mortar ranges, and that they could be taken out with a rush down the east side, and with foreknowledge of where the enemy tanks were parked. My plan was to flank west as much as possible and stay out of mortar range. While not having such an open space between us and the tanks as I approached the prison too, this idea pretty much failed, as the terrain doesn't allow for it, and only one unit of infantry coming out of a Bradley actually got anywhere close to the western flank as I originally wanted. We do have a better spread of units to fire on the armor this time, but the smoke screens have gone up right away. In my experience, if the AI senses that anything that can fire smoke is under attack, it will just put the smoke out in the relevant place immediately, like frame perfect. As in, if the unit smells there's an ATGM in range or an ATGM targeting it or looking at it, it just smokes off the path the missile will take, so it's very attentive like that. Anyway, the action I was looking to achieve was over in like 3 seconds. An ATGM got around to the smokescreen and splashed the tank. The infantry and Bradley came in on the left to secure a guard tower and take out the Humvee. And now we've got our angle on that prison that will stay out of mortar range. The enemy have troops in more guard towers. But this time it's my turn to smoke. I smoked everything and charged, ignoring perhaps the fact the enemy's elevation means they can totally see over the smoke screen. I like to think the game doesn't take that into account, but who knows. We go into this micro-heavy 3-front attack where enemy infantry are pushing our centre in the town. We're pushing the enemy back with armour in the west, and I'm again making a sneak attack in the east to try and snipe those mortar trucks with RPGs. I have a distinct memory of this moment in this battle. It was really good. Why? Because the plan worked. I think that's it basically. I absolutely loved this advance through Tortuga because it was ultimately just intense enough and went well enough and was rewarding my tactics enough. And you might be saying, hey, that's only true because you save scummed and base your tactics on unfair knowledge of the enemy's setup. And I say, yeah, pretty much, and this is where my this isn't fun the first time point I was going on about in the first part probably begins to materialize, because I really liked playing this advance the second time. It was some of the best RTS action I've played in general. even though it only lasted about 2 minutes really if you take out all the pauses over 15 minutes of attack. But that's also pretty cool. It was a clean, continuous attack over 3 fronts with maximum pressure. It was an ideal outcome really. It's only that it's diluted as an achievement, because you are given actually unlimited time to make that 2-minute attack and unlimited overall attempts. It's like I was proud of myself in the moment for succeeding here, even though I achieved this looking back on it, as caught on video, using underhanded methods, intentional ones the game gives you though. So I guess I am playing the game right. It's only that I feel less good than I would have if the game put some more realistic restrictions on me. But that would only be true if I still won, and I wouldn't have. Therefore, we conclude once again that after all my flailing about, it's actually perfect the way it is. They did it. They got me the fun and the challenge. I did get both. Not necessarily at the same time, but it worked, right? Maybe that's as good as it gets. But I'm ever unsatisfied. I'm like, no, there is a way to do this better to the game. And then I'm like, well, there is a way to play this better to myself. There is actually something to be proud of in this footage, by the way. Well, in a sense, I played this assault without using the rest of my army. And it turns out you are allowed to use them. Yes, the thing staring some of you in the face this whole time is that on the right, we have a button to call in more units that I totally didn't notice in the thick of the action. When I discovered this, I was both happy that I had somehow got this far without it, and relieved because I could play with more units now. I actually did a very optional save scum to play the assault for a 3rd time. I don't think I went far back enough to get the extra units as soon as you could have them, but just far back enough that I was doing a lot of the battle with them, that sort of thing. The problem was now, with all of these extra units added in, while I guess the game's easier, the feeling of me being in control is lost. The micro demands are shooting up, more mistakes will be made, and indeed, just the action is lost because more time is spent with the game pause, more time is spent on the tactics, the balance of tactics to action shifts. And I feel like I had more fun playing with fewer units, and it also still worked as well. Earlier I was asking for some sort of platoon leader AI to do things for me, and now I'm thinking maybe I should be the platoon leader. Like, your player character is the company leader de facto, but acts as like the fireteam leaders, like they control absolutely everything on the ground. And this is sort of unrealistic, there should be stages in between, and I want to be somewhere in between there. I think you can do a lot in this game, with just like 8 squads and a couple of vehicles, and everything else can be AI. I'm starting to imagine a take on this game where you select which units are yours in the company. The rest are controlled by the AI, which would be impossible to program, but I'm just going to ignore that. And then the game doesn't let you pause. That's what I'm looking for here, an excuse to remove the pausing. Because then maybe you'd have the action-packed, like ultra high stakes tactics, building by building, corner by corner approach, which I could sense the game was very close to achieving. You know what? I actually know what all of this is. I know where all of these complaints are coming from about this game. I know why, when I'm like, oh, the game's perfect, but I'm still not satisfied. I know what this is all about. It's because this game is a little bit like what I wanted the XCOM series to become. I think that's what I'm realizing. This is what they should have done with XCOM, isn't it? XCOM in this game engine, that's it. That's the final game that ever needs to be made. I do consider this game almost XCOM adjacent, because it's de facto turn-based, and it has persistence through a campaign that might seem non-linear but actually isn't. This is next generation XCOM. Just swap the robot skeletons we're fighting, which you can't even really see in most of the footage anyway, for sectoids. It would be the same game, but it's XCOM. Take that, focus more on squad-based tactics, but still have the sort of wide battlefields with loads going on, everything blowing up, and vehicles and big things and stuff. And what you've got there is a really good XCOM game. Maybe that's what I'm sensing this whole time. Slytherin, the devs and publishers of this game, need to call for Exis right now, or whoever owns the XCOM IP these days, I don't remember. You've already done half the work on the perfect XCOM game in Terminator Dark Fate, Enemy Within, and so on, many titles. You can add all the titles you like. XCOM likes doing that as well. And relax. In the end, the cartel were all killed or routed, and Lucia, the spy from earlier, reappears conveniently too late to help with a movement force that will now take over the town. The slaves are freed. I guess it's better. We never really learn what movement society is like. But they're pretty chill, I guess. They can't be bothered to use currency, they let their troops desert whenever they want. They're a pretty laid-back bunch that have somehow carved an empire from the decaying United States without anyone so much as noticing or remembering their name. New Tortuga's gonna be a hell of a town, but of course my only concern now is stealing everything not nailed down and then shipping out. Because all this didn't really progress our goal of finding what the Legion are doing with prisoners at all, as it turned out. Hooray! The game says it was about 1 hour and 10 minutes, that mission. I've got 2 hours and 15 minutes of footage, not including redoing the RPG side questing again, which I didn't film, and not including the looting phase, which I also didn't film. Shall we say it's about 3 hours really? It's a heck of a stage, and supposedly it used to be much harder until people moaned to the devs enough for them to patch it to make it easier. Perhaps easy enough that even mindless Devin could basically complete the stage without realizing you could call in an Abrams and a heavy howitzer platform to make it way easier. The cartel proved formidable opponents indeed, and we're going to be seeing much more of them, as the game is now in its official cartel arc. Someone also mentioned that the cartel part of the game isn't that long on paper, being like only a third of the total missions. It's just that it's quite difficult, and it's near the start when you're probably playing slower. So combined with missions that have loads of objectives coming at you and a weird RPG quest back there, I guess the total runtime of the game is more than a third dedicated to the cartel, especially if you include the Marauder battle we'll see later, where you have to fight a different cartel basically. You know what? The part I remember as being my favourite mission in the game is coming up next, as well as a mission that isn't my favourite, but it was just the most chaotic and crazy RTS mission design I've ever seen, with absolutely no mercy. Every achievement you make will be immediately taken away from you. Every time you think it's under control, it suddenly isn't. Basically 2 stages that I remember well for different reasons will hopefully be fit into the next part. And on top of all this, the stuff I'm going to show you next is all optional. The main quest right now is to head to Oklahoma, because we happened to catch a whiff of the Founders' main radio channel at some point, and we learned there are general orders going out to all the regional forces to gather into an army. But if you feel like being a maverick renegade hero who won't let the cartel get away with anything, you can take a suggestion from Lucia to go hit the next city down the highway, which is where the cartel's ultra-uber-for-real this time leaders are based. Thinking back and remembering the huge side quest I'm about to get dragged into here, it makes me smile now thinking back. I think it's a smile of pride for somehow going into this insane maelstrom so naively and coming out bruised and battered but still able to tell the tale. It's exhilarating, this game, you've got to give it that, but I can totally see people getting this far and noting the fun per minute ratio isn't really the best. Luckily, Offie D is a true soldier who's willing to put in roughly 45 minutes a day to his gaming commentary cause, so let's see where the action takes us next.